County Wake is now convened and set into a special session. The Honorable Judge Michael R. Morgan, President, presiding. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. God save the state in this honorable court. Please make sure your cell phones are turned off or in vibrating mode. Have a seat, please. The judge will apologize for the delay. The man with the video said the reason he wanted to make sure is because we have so many lawyers in the courtroom. He didn't want that to happen.
All right. Well, Sheriff, just don't arrest them and all will be well. Thank you, Sheriff Harrison, and good afternoon to all of you. I welcome you to this special session of Wake County Superior Court, which is convened for the purpose of a memorial service conducted jointly by the 10th Judicial District Bar and the Wake County Bar Association to pay tribute to our colleagues in the law whom we have lost over the course of the past months. I welcome and acknowledge the presence of any of my fellow judges that are here. I see Judge Inman to my left. I also see Judge Hobgood, both of the Superior Court. I see Judge Eagles, formerly of our appellate bench. And as I continue to survey the crowd, I welcome all. I see Judge Pittman, a Special Superior Court judge in the back. And I hope that I am not overlooking anyone. If I am, attribute that to my eyes and not to my heart. Also, I acknowledge any elected officials that are present. I certainly want to thank our High Sheriff of Wake County, the Honorable Donnie Harrison, for taking time from his expansive duties in our great county to be with us, accompanied by Deputy Sanchez. And while we have great deputies that you assign to us in the courthouse, Sheriff, we appreciate your presence today. I particularly thank the family members, loved ones, and friends of those whom we salute today, not merely for their presence, but also for allowing us as members of the local legal bar to share with them in remembering those who we, in a large sense, consider to be a part of our own extended family as we got to know them and cherish them going through our daily lives. I thank Wake County Senior Resident Superior Court Judge Donald Stevens for entrusting this Wake County Superior Court special session to my supervision, and likewise thank the Bar Association in welcoming the assignment of it to my care. At this special and meaningful time of the year, this memorial service is especially poignant. During the course of it, we may laugh, we may cry. But thankfully, we're assembled together in this place so that we can do that together as we honor our fallen legal comrades. At this time, the court recognizes Attorney Nan Hanna, President of the 10th Judicial District Bar and the Wake County Bar Association, for any remarks. Madam President.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think this may be the first time I've ever addressed a court with my back to the court, so my apologies. Thank you all for being here. This is one of the rare privileges as president, soon to be past president, of the Wake County Bar and the 10th Judicial District Bar. I'm the daughter of a 60-year lawyer who is in failing health, and over the last 2 weeks, 2 of his very close colleagues have died over in Greensboro. So for me, this is a time I've always cherished coming to these events to hear about the lions of the profession, the folks who have gone before us, who have set the examples that we all hope to follow as we go through our careers. So I welcome you on behalf of the Wake County Bar and the 10th Judicial District Bar, and I hope you'll, if you're a family, I hope this will be meaningful to you. If you are lawyers, I hope this will be meaningful in a wholly different way to each and every one of you. So thank you very much for being here, and thank you, Your Honor.
And thank you. At this time, the court now recognizes Attorney Clark Brewer, Chairperson of the Memorials Committee, to facilitate the remainder of the program.
May it please the court. At the conclusion of the presentations, I will thank some people who have helped contribute to this, but at this point, we're going to move right into the presentations. And the first presenter is David R. Dorton, who practiced law, and I'm sure he will speak to this, with Tom Adams back years ago. But David is with the firm of Williams Mullen. He got his BA degree from Wake Forest in 1975 and got his law degree from the University of North Carolina in 1979.
I very much appreciate this opportunity to speak about Tom Adams, and I thank the family and I thank the Wake County Bar Association for giving me this opportunity. Tom hired me in 1979 out of law school, and he was one of the greatest positive impacts in my life and in my career that I've had. He was just a great man. Tom was born in 1921 in Willow Springs, grew up on a farm in Willow Springs, and amongst other things there, he learned the value of hard work. He used to come to Raleigh on Saturdays and sell eggs. Tom was an undergraduate at Carolina, got a degree in journalism. He captained a ship in the Pacific Theater in the Navy in World War II. After the war, he came back and he got his law degree from Carolina. He was a Carolina guy through and through. After law school, Tom went to work with George Balcom here in Raleigh. And Tom was soon and well on his way to being a real estate lawyer. And that's what Tom was all about, real estate law and real estate. That was Tom's passion. And by the time he hired me, he was already one of the true deans of the real estate bar in the Raleigh and Wake County area. Tom was a real pioneer in our profession. We have much to be thankful to Tom for. He built what at the time was one of the largest law firms in Wake County, along with Jim C. and Bill Rouse and some other names you would recognize if I said them. And it was a real estate boutique firm. It was all about real estate and had other practice areas that would support the real estate practice. But it was one of the largest firms in the county. And it was also one of the first large firms to move out of downtown, out into the suburbs. At that time it was the suburbs, out toward North Hills. And Tom had a lot of vision. He built his practice, he moved it out of downtown. Tom had a real passion for land use and zoning. He was the first lawyer I know of to really focus on and develop a practice in the land use and zoning areas. And he was interested in all kinds of real estate development, and he got the bug, as many of us do, to go and be a businessman. And I don't think it was to make money so much as he just loved development of real estate and wanted to try his hand at it. And he developed Kildare Farms in Cary. And Kildare Farms was the first planned unit development in North Carolina. Practically every big residential project now is a planned unit development. In fact, most commercial projects now have aspects of a planned unit development. But Tom was a real pioneer in that area. In fact, when you look at documents that relate to the development and the governance of real estate today, that govern planned unit developments, restrictive covenants, how they work, how they set up homeowners associations, if you look at the language in them, a lot of them go back to documents that Tom pioneered and wrote back when he was doing the first planned unit development communities in our area. As I said, his real passion, the thing he liked more than anything else, was land use and zoning. I spent many evenings with Tom in his office talking about land use and zoning cases because he dearly loved to talk about them and to work on them. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some personal qualities of Tom that were important to his practice of law and that he imparted to me and that I learned from him. One was the value of hard work. Tom was one of the hardest working guys I ever knew. The first week I was working with Tom, I was, all the staff went home at 5 o'clock, and pretty much the other lawyers we worked with went home at 5 o'clock too. So about the third or fourth day I was there, I was headed out to my car in the parking lot, and Tom came running out of the building and chased me down. He said, "We have work to do." And that was the first of many nights for a period of, at least 5 years, that more nights than not I spent in Tom's office theoretically helping him, but what he was really doing was teaching me to practice law. Which leads me to another trait that Tom imparted to me that's important to us as lawyers. Tom was a very generous guy. He was generous with his money, but there's a lot more to generosity than just money. Tom was generous with his time, with his advice, with his ideas. Anything he could share with you, he would. And what that taught me was we have an obligation to the younger members of the bar, the people coming along, the ones that we take out of law school and teach to be lawyers, to be generous with our time and our advice. And it's not all about making money. We need to be like Tom was. We need to help them learn how to practice law, and it takes time. And he was generous with his time with everyone, not just me. It was everybody. Tom was a really creative guy. As I told you, he was a pioneer in land use and zoning and in PUD development in Wake County. And a lot of the ideas for that came from Tom. I want to give you one real small example of Tom's creativity. One of his favorite zoning cases was the Wake Stone Quarry out off Harrison Avenue in Cary, which is adjacent to Umstead Park. And Tom very convincingly and effectively argued to the county commissioners that quarry would actually be a benefit to the park because it would attract wildlife to the park, and the park would be better off for it. And he was believable, and I thought that was a great example of creativity on his part. Who would have ever thought of that? Another trait of Tom that is important is loyalty. Tom was a loyal guy. He was loyal to me. He was loyal to everybody in the firm. He was loyal to his clients. Even after Tom and I weren't practicing law anymore together, Tom was always there for me. He wanted me to do well. He was just there for me. He is an intensely loyal guy. In addition to practicing law, practicing real estate law, and being involved in real estate, Tom had some outside interests. Tom was a family man. Many of his family are here today, and that's a good thing because he dearly loved his family, including his wife Ann, who predeceased him. They've been married for a long time. Tom also liked to play golf. The other big thing in Tom's life was being at the beach. He loved Emerald Isle, he loved net fishing, and he loved digging for clams. That's how he got away from everything. That was his stress release. So my takeaway personally from Tom's life, and I guess the best thing that I know to say about Tom and that I would know to say about most people is that Tom had such a tremendous positive impact on my life. I owe a lot of where I am today to Tom. And if you can say something, if somebody could say that about me, I would think I had really accomplished something. And I'm very proud to say that about Tom Adams. Thanks.
Our next presenter will be Duncan A. McMillan.
Please, the court. Thank you, Clark. And I'd like to thank everyone else for being here today, and I'd like to thank Jim's family for asking me to make a few remarks on his behalf. I first met Jim Cline 33 years ago. When I got out of law school, I started practicing with Jim Kimsey and Steve Smith, and I had a matter come up that dealt with a parole question. And so I asked my father, who's seated here today, what in the world do I do with a parole question? And he said, well, talk to Jim Cline. He's a young lawyer who practices with Buck Ransdell, and he used to be on the parole commission. I said, okay. So I tracked down Jim, went over. He answered my question to the best of his ability, which was probably dead on, but he said, hold on, let me call my friend Andy Terrell at the parole commission, make sure we've got this right. So he got Andy Terrell, who's still working on the parole commission, to help me out. And from that moment on, I mean, I felt a very close kinship with Jim. The last 20 years or so, Jim did primarily criminal law, though the first 20 years of his law practice, he had a wide variety of practice. And in that 20 years, I'll say, I saw Jim on a daily basis in the Wake County courts. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Well, let's go back just from a biographical standpoint. Jim was born in Emporia, Virginia. He moved with his family to the outskirts of Raleigh over off of Blue Ridge Road, rented a little tenant house, His daddy worked in heavy equipment. I don't know, it could have been for Gregory Poole, somebody like that. But Jim grew up out there, but went to Cary High School. He graduated from Cary High School when there were 3,000 people living in the town of Cary. At the age of 14 and a half, he started work at the old A&P grocery store on Hillsborough Street. And by the time he was 18, having graduated from high school, he was the manager of the A&P store on Hillsborough Street. But thereafter, Jim was in the United States Air Force. He worked on top secret clearance projects in the Pentagon. He went to North Carolina State University, putting himself through school there, working for the United States Post Office. He graduated, well, he married Lois, I believe, in June of 1964, and graduated from North Carolina State in 1965. He went to work for Nationwide Insurance Company as an underwriter and adjuster, and then in 1967 started law school. He graduated in 1970. Thereafter, as I referred to before, he worked for the Parole Commission, and then he took a job with Buck Ransell and his brother Philip. Jim, of course, like a lot of the folks, referred to Buck as Old Clip Ear. Those of you who remember him know that the top of one of his ears was missing, though it was a mule who had bitten it off and not Mike Tyson. But one of the things you got to know about Jim is, with the possible exception of Ellis Nassif, he was the tightest son of a bitch I have ever met in my life. He could tell you the price of gas at every gas station in Cary and Raleigh. He had about a 1976 Chevrolet truck that he kept running with baling wire and chewing gum, piecing it together. He would talk ad nauseum about redoing the brakes on that old truck and every little thing he had to do. He heated his house forever with firewood, had a big old wood stove down in the basement, and he loved nothing more than finding some free firewood. He would take it by the truckload and dump it in his yard, and he and his brother would spend all spring cutting the firewood up. You'd see him coming through the metal detectors downstairs, and the coins scattered all over the floor. Jim would kick those pennies to the side, reach down and pick them up, put them in his pocket. I mean, he was remarkable how stingy he was. If you go by his house today, if you look up there on the upper left-hand side of the roof, there's a place where there's some shingles got damaged. Well, I think he found a piece of sheet metal, and he went up there and wedged it in there and said, I ain't paying a roofer to do this. I can make the roof stop leaking, which he did. And he was a handyman, fixed everything around the house. He bought everything by way of groceries on special at Food Line. He didn't buy anything if he couldn't get 2 for 1. But Jim was devoted to his family. He's got 3 sons, 2 daughters-in-law, 3 grandchildren, one of whom was born a month after Jim died. And I asked Lois if there was anything in particular she wanted me to say. And she said, I want you to tell those folks he loved his grandchildren. And Jim did. He would, there are not many of us smokers left, but Jim and I and C.K. Brown, his dear friend, and Mark Perry would smoke together out in front of the courthouse. And he would talk about those grandbabies, talk about taking them fishing. I had never met Lois or the boys before Jim died, but I felt like I had grown up with him because he talked about his children as they were growing up. He talked about his grandbabies when they came along. He was absolutely devoted to his family. He talked also about Lois because he apparently did a lot of the cooking at home. And he would talk about a particular recipe she liked and how he had to stir it just so and put in just the right spices because that's the way she liked it. He was devoted to his family. But I will conclude with a few remarks about Jim as a lawyer. I do nothing but criminal work. Spend most of my days on the second and third floor of the courthouse, then pop up to the fourth floor for felony probable cause. And as I say, for the last 20 years, that's what Jim did by and large. I saw him every day. I never, ever saw a lawyer who was more prepared, who was more meticulous in his preparation, and who was more steadfastly devoted to obtaining a good result for his client. He was a master at reading the statutes and understanding case law and the application of the statutes. He had a phenomenal knowledge of the motor vehicle code. And just by virtue of my age, I suppose, a lot of folks out on the second floor will come up, hey, Duncan, what do you do with this situation? Hey, Duncan, what do you do with this situation? And a lot of times I can help people, and I'm glad to do it. But somebody will come up sometime and say, hey, Duncan, what do you do with this situation? I say, shit if I know, ask Cline. He was the one you went to when you needed an answer that no one else had. He quietly went about his business. He never made headlines. He didn't seek glory. He didn't boast about his work. But for the last 20 years, there is not a lawyer in Wake County who has done a better job in representing people in the criminal bar than Jim Cline. Lois commented after his service back in June that she had no idea how well thought of he was among the bar. Well, I'm here today to repeat and to assure you that he had the respect of every judge before whom he appeared, every prosecutor against whom he tried a case, and every defense lawyer who saw him work. His ability, his conscientiousness, his professionalism, his unfailing courtesy, but steadfast devotion to his clients is unparalleled, and we will all miss him. Thank you.
Our next presenter is the Honorable Cressie H. Thigpen, Jr., who is serving on the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and His Honor got his B.S. degree from North Carolina Central University in 1968 and got his law degree from Rutgers University in 1973.
Judge Morgan, presiding judge, fellow judges, members of the 10th Judicial District Bar and the Wake County Bar Association, the family of all of the lawyers who passed this year, and friends who are here to celebrate their lives. President Hanna, it is my pleasure to be here today to give you some informal remarks about my former law partner and one of my best friends, Carlton Fellers. Carlton and I practiced with the law firm of Thigpen, Blue, Stevens, and Fellers from 1984 until 2008. Carlton handled most of the real estate matters that we had and most of the estate work, although he had been a criminal lawyer, had done a lot of that, had done a small amount of civil work, but concentrated mostly in the criminal area. In the practice, Carlton was loved by all of the staff. He was the lawyer in the office who always engaged the staff. He wanted to know about them. He wanted to know about their families. I called it gossip. They called it just talking. But he knew everything that was going on in the lives of all of the staff members. Carlton also had an ability to take small things that were happening in the office and embellish them and turn them into funny stories. Sometimes he would embellish them to the point that nobody recognized the facts that previously existed. And one of our partners, Ralph Stevens, gave a name to that. He called it fellerizing. And so when we would have one of these stories that ended up being a very funny story that we knew wasn't quite the same as the way it originally started, we knew that it had been fellerized. Carlton always called it just adding yeast to the story. And we allowed him to do that. Carlton was not only a partner, but he was also a very good friend of mine, and I would talk with him. We talked quite a bit over the years, if not every day, just about every other day. And when I was appointed to the Superior Court bench in 2008, I would call him. Carlton had been a former Superior Court judge for about a year. And so I would call Carlton to get advice about what I ought to do as a Superior Court judge. And there are things that new judges want to know about. I mean, for instance, where do judges get their robes from? I mean, is there a judge robe store that you go to? Can you use your robe from graduation? Is it okay to do that? High school graduation, college graduation? When the bailiff opens court and says, "All stand, all ye," and the judge walks out as Judge Morgan did, do you stand up until the bailiff stops giving his pronouncement? Or do you sit down because you're the judge and then let the bailiff finish and then let everybody else sit down? I mean, these are important things, Judge Hopgood, that rookie judges want to know about. And so I would call Carlton, and I would tell him what my dilemma was. And he would listen. And he would say, "Thigpen, you got to be the dumbest judge I know." And then I'd listen to him. And after he finished, I would say, "Carlton, that's about the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life." And then he would say, "How you doing, man?" And then we would carry on the conversation of the day. Carlton was, he was really, I thought, a true Renaissance man. He was a great storyteller, and he had a fantastic memory. And Carlton, you know, many of us can remember the larger things that have happened in the past. The thing about Carlton is that Carlton could not only do that, but he could also remember the very minute details. He could remember who said what, under what circumstances, how they were said, exactly what was said, what the response was. And so he would have these very long stories that he could tell about things that had happened. I can remember a trip that we took down to Savannah to a football game, and the drive we drove, Carlton was driving, and the trip was probably about 5.5 hours from here. And this was not early on in our practice. This was really later on in our practice. And I thought that I had pretty much heard every story that Carlton ever had to tell. So for 5.5 hours driving down to Savannah, he talked the whole time going down. And they were about stories, things that had happened to him over his life, and they were stories that I'd never heard before. Coming back from Savannah, 5.5 hours, he talked the whole time coming back to Raleigh. And he told new stories that I'd never heard of. But he had this fantastic memory, and he loved to tell stories. He was an author. Carlton had written a book. Now, it was just not a small book. It was really a tome. It was a big fiction. And I tried to get him to get it published, and he didn't want to do that. I always thought Carlton was afraid of failure. He just didn't want somebody to tell him that it wasn't worth publishing. But it was good material. And I had encouraged him to let a book club read it, and they did. And they indicated that in that book were 3 different stories, and that Carlton ought to develop those stories. I'm not quite sure whether he did or not, but he should have. He was an avid reader. Carlton could talk about a wide range of subjects. What I learned that over the years as we spent more time together is that most of the time he had no idea what he was talking about, but at least he had an opinion, and he could talk about the subjects. He was a good cook. He loved to cook. Carlton was a dapper dresser. All of us who were here in the courtroom and courthouse knew that Carlton was a great dresser. And he could sing. I didn't know this, but when Carlton was in the service, he was in the Air Force. And he belonged to a doo-wop group. they were stationed in Japan. And this group would go to the various military bases throughout Japan, and they would entertain the troops. And he was a part of this group. One of Carlton's greatest loves was his daughter Tracy, who is here with us today. And her mother, Phyllis, Carlton and Phyllis divorced, but Phyllis, I suspect, based on things that he told me over the years, that you remained his true love. We followed Tracy when she was in high school, and we followed her when she went to Northwestern University. We knew who her first boyfriend was. We knew that whether Carlton liked him or didn't, we knew that she had gotten a job as a reporter in Virginia, working for one of the newspapers. We knew when she had decided that she wanted to be an opera singer, and that she moved to Washington, D.C. to do that. And when she came back to Durham, and she just decided to teach. But Tracy is a author also. She teaches literature at Bennett College. So she has gotten this love of writing, honestly, from her father. I miss the times that I would call Carlton and the time that we would talk on the telephone. Tracy misses him. We all miss him. The profession has suffered a great loss by him not being here. And we thank you so much for allowing us to say these few things about him. Thank you so much.
Our next presenter is going to be Marvin Schiller, and he's with the firm of Schiller and Schiller. Got his BA degree from the University of Miami in 1961. Got his PhD degree in philosophy from UNC in 1970, and got his law degree from Duke University in 1975.
Good afternoon. I'm Marvin Schiller. I was married to Carol. To Carol Masters Schiller on February 8th, 1964 until December 5, 2009. She was a superb woman and remarkable in many respects. We had a memorial service for Carol at the Crabtree Valley Baptist Church soon after her passing. And then we went to Loganville, Georgia, where she was interred next to her parents at a small cemetery adjacent to the Shiloh Primitive Baptist Church. Carol was Baptist, and my origin was Hebrew, and we never had a difference of a philosophical nature. I wish I could say that about all the other differences we had during the course of the marriage. There is adjacent to Carol one more slot which is currently empty, And during the time prior to the end of Carol's life, when we visited that cemetery and talked to the minister there, upon which I inquired that I wished to be buried next to Carol, and I didn't want it to disturb anybody else by me being the only Hebrew in a primitive Baptist church cemetery, upon which the minister quickly replied that we were all God's children, and that perhaps signals how far we have come in many a day. So Carol, upon which punched a one-way ticket for me to join her at the appropriate time, upon which I will. I mentioned this religious factor because Carol's parents, Mary Garrett Masters, her maiden name being Garrett, came from a very long line of persons of Southern ancestry, which predated even the forming of the Union. And likewise, her father, whose last name, of course, was Masters, and his family predated the forming of the Union as well. This is remarkable in a number of factors. At the time I met Carol, I was a graduate student in philosophy with, of course, having had a beard. Carol told me that her parents were to be visiting her during Thanksgiving at UNC in Chapel Hill, and that she had explained to her parents, my particular ancestry and so on, which was of some concern to her parents. Carol was born in St. Augustine, Florida, and when she was 2, her family moved to Brooklyn because her father, having served previously in the Navy before the outbreak of the war, found a good position as an electrician in the Brooklyn Navy shipyard. So she was born a Southerner, one might say, but was raised in Brooklyn. And she went to Cortland College, which is now the part of the SUNY, or State University of New York, at Cortland, and upon which she graduated, having been raised in a Yankee town and having gone to a Yankee college. Her parents wisely thought, they will now send her to UNC at Chapel Hill, so hopefully she will meet a nice Southern boy. And I explained to Carol that should be no problem. I was born in the Deep South, Miami. I may run over on my allotted time if you don't mind, because I speak rather slowly. I hope that's okay with everybody. Carol, when I met her, was in a Master's of Arts in Teaching for science education. And her first position teaching was in a small town in Connecticut, where she taught chemistry and physics. I then completed my PhD in philosophy, and of course, at the time we were married, I can assure you I was clean shaven with a short haircut. And we moved to Dallas, Texas, where I had a teaching position at Southern Methodist University, SMU. And she began a program in graduate school. Ultimately, she graduated with a PhD in biochemistry. I believe the first woman to have done so. And then I had, by that time, had obtained a position at the University of Toronto in Canada. And our son, David, who was here with me, behind me, was born in Canada. And I believe he's now still a dual citizen in case the necessity of him quietly passing the border, should there be a need to do so, he would be able to. Behind me also is May Helen Bryant, who was Carol's health care provider during her rather long illness, which lasted approximately 10 years, and whom the last 3 years slept over in David's now having departed his room for the last 3 years. And during this time, Carol and Helen had such a friendship that they considered themselves sisters. That's how close it was. And I would ask them that what they would be doing today, and they would laugh and say, "We're not telling you." And they would go off and do whatever. But that shows sort of the Carol of a certain dimension as well as Helen. So after Helen said, "Well, it looks like if I'm a sister to Carol, I'm now part of the Schiller family." And I said, "That's great." I said, "But just remember, once you're a member of the Schiller family, you can't ever leave the family." Upon which Helen said, "Does that mean if I try to leave, you'll kill me?" And that's the sort of relationship that we had. Carol was afflicted with a very rare disease. The abbreviation is PSP, and is progressive supranuclear palsy, which in some ways has some relationship to Parkinson's disease, but it's really quite different. In any event, when I saw what the circumstance was, I was eventually able to fund a fellowship at the UNC Medical School in Carol's name. And the first professor, a gentleman named Kirk Williamson, was named at a party which Carol was able to attend, and is currently that professor who holds the title of Carol Masters Schiller's Distinguished Scholar of Neurology at UNC Medical School. And she was delighted, and I think it gave her great comfort in her final days. And I told Carol, since we had interesting theological relationship, was that, Carol, I've done my best to give you eternal life by establishing the fellowship. And we could laugh about that. Carol later became a board-certified toxicologist, and she would testify as an expert witness periodically. Colin Willoughby, our district attorney, commented after a trial in which Carol testified as an expert witness for a defendant who enjoyed some spirits greater than he needed to have. And I believe Joe Bass was the defense attorney, and Colin remarked afterwards that she was the toughest witness he ever cross-examined. Later, when she passed, before she passed, one of her law school professors, because she went on and went to UNC, and the significance of that is marked with the fact that she was at the time a research scientist at NIEHS in the Triangle. She was the first woman to become tenured, who was a bench scientist, after many able women prior to her were not awarded tenure. And she worked ably to rectify the promotion and pay of women at NIEHS. And she wrote distinguished and seminal papers on a compound that is found in Agent Orange. And some of that seminal work, according to the current head of NIEHS, who, by the way, is now a woman, and whom benefited for Carol's becoming the first tenured woman. I'll tell you one or two other stories about Carol, though there's much, much more to say, which hopefully will be in a book that I'm trying to write. A couple of stories exemplify that. Upon Carol getting a law degree and then making me able to have the firm of Schiller and Schiller, she sometimes appeared on calendars and with me. And so in one instance of a judge who was not a Wake County judge, and I think she was appearing really as the second attorney, and it was my case. And so the judge asked after seeing this, he asked, he said, well, what relationship are you to Marvin Schiller? And she replied, by law only. That was Carol. One other time, I should tell you, was an interesting story where, and she loved to cook and was an able cook. In fact, there wasn't practically anything that Carol could not do ably. And I had come home one night and she had started to cook supper, and I could tell, as many of us have been in this position who have been married for a good period of time, that she was miffed at me for some reason. And so I figured I would sort of slide in it sideways, I think is the expression. And so I sort of, asked a few things, and I could tell I wasn't making any headway whatsoever. And so I asked Carol, I said, what's up? Why are you, miffed at me? And I said, I'm not a mind reader, Carol. To which she replied, you better be. Thank you all for your patience. It was an honor to appear before you. Thank you.
Our next presenter will be Donald R. Strickland. He's with the law firm of Twiggs, Beskin, Strickland, and Rabineau. He got his BS degree from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in 1978 and got his law degree from Duke University in 1984.
Doing the Chapel Hill cha-cha. First of all, may it please the court, Judge Morgan. It is truly an honor for me to be up here to talk about Howard Twiggs. I had the distinct honor and privilege of spending my entire career with Howard. I came out of law school and started working with Howard 27 years ago. Howard has been one of my dearest friends. He was my mentor. He was a man that showed great compassion and a man from whom everybody could learn. He enriched our lives, everybody's lives he touched. He made their lives better, and he had a passion for life that was just truly amazing, and he really did live his life to the fullest. Howard was a lawyer's lawyer. He was a legislature's legislator. He was a leader of leaders, and he was one of the world's sweetest people. Howard's joy for life was infectious, and he always seemed to make everybody smile and feel better about themselves. I know most of you, certainly the lawyers, knew Howard and knew him well, and if you were walking down the street and Howard saw you across the street, he was going to get your attention, he was going to come over and he was going to have a conversation with you. We used to joke in the office, if you were going to go out to lunch with Howard, you might as well set aside 2 hours. 30 minutes to eat, 30 minutes to talk to people on the way to the restaurant, 30 minutes to talk to people at the restaurant, and 30 minutes to talk to people on the way back. And that's just the way he was. In North Carolina, Howard was a great legislator. Some of his best legislative accomplishments were for the people who did not have a voice. He spent a lot of time, he rewrote the laws for mental health patients in North Carolina. And in 1969, he was instrumental in removing all references to race from our state laws. Howard loved Wake Forest. If anybody knew Howard, he was an avid Wake Forest person through and through. And he was on the Board of Visitors there. He was honored by Wake Forest by receiving the Distinguished Alumni Award in 2002. But I think one of the things that Howard liked most and the best fun he had at Wake Forest, I was an avid Carolina fan, always have and always will. Hopefully they'll get a basketball team going here soon. But Howard always would tell me during the ACC tournament, he said, Strickland, I got the tickets. And I know what that meant. That meant he got the Wake Forest tickets. And so I had to go to Wake Forest to all the ACC games, sit in the Wake Forest section, sit with Howard, listen to all the Wake Forest stories, and that's just the way it was. And I think that that was one thing that he really enjoyed, was making me be a little deacon as much as he could. You know, Howard was one of the most distinguished lawyers that North Carolina has ever had. He served the people and he served the law. He was the president of the North Carolina Association of Trial Lawyers. It's now called the American Association for Justice. But he did not run for that office. The way he became elected was that there was a crisis with the president who was incoming. There was a potential for a scandal. And it was at a time in the jurisprudence and the politics of our country that the president of the American Academy of Trial Lawyers needed someone who was just impeccable. The leadership of that organization got together and they chose Howard and asked him if he would be the president. And he graciously agreed to do so. And that just speaks volume as to who Howard Twiggs was. He didn't run. He was unopposed. He was unanimously selected by all the lawyers in the association. While he was there, Howard received the 3 highest awards that the American Association of Justice gave. He was only one of 2 people in the history of that organization that has ever received both of those awards. I mean, all 3 of those awards. He received the Leonard Ring Champion of Justice Award, the Harry Philo Commitment to Individual Rights and Leadership Award, and the David Traeger President's Award for visionary leadership, support, and service to the cause of justice. Now, after Howard passed away, the American Association of Justice thought that they needed to have one more distinguished award. And this summer, they created the Howard Twiggs Commitment to Justice Award, and that award is going to be given annually to the lawyer within the American Association of Justice that demonstrates the commitment to the civil justice system that Howard had. I am confident that this will be one of the most treasured and coveted and prestigious awards that the American Association of Justice will ever give out. The first recipient of that award was in Vancouver at the annual meeting this summer, and Richard Bader, a distinguished lawyer from Connecticut, received the award and gave just a warmest reception speech and talked about some really funny stories about Howard. In addition to that award, Howard was very involved with the Roscoe Pound Civil Justice Institute, and there's been an endowment set up through gifts from friends and family and lawyers throughout the country. And there's an endowment set up to pay for speakers to come and give speeches to the Roscoe Pound Institute of Justice. You know, during my 26 years with Howard, we traveled a lot. The last time I was in this courtroom, actually, was with Howard. We tried our last case in this courtroom. Trying a case with Howard was one of the most fun experiences you could have. He was such a people person, and he was always looking to figure out the best way to present the injury claims and the damages claims, and he spent an enormous time with the people that were involved in the case. Howard always told me, he told me one time, he said, Strickland, you know, when I first started practicing law, I thought the law was about the law. And then as I started trying more cases, I decided it's really not about the law, it's about the facts. And he said, and after I'd tried enough cases, what I really came to understand as a lawyer is that what we do, the practice of law, is about people. And so when he wanted to try a case, what he wanted to do was to find out about the people, find out about what people said, who the relatives were, who the friends were, and that was always the foundation of the arguments that he made to a jury. And he was very compelling because he gave those arguments from the heart, and it was obvious that he gave them from the heart. As some of you, as some of you know, I lost my 18-year-old son a little over 4 years ago. And Howard and Peyton were great friends. And I asked Howard to give the eulogy, or one of the eulogies. And so he came to my house 3 nights in a row. And he sat around and he talked to all of Peyton's friends, all of his family, and wrote down probably 10 pages of information that he wanted to talk about. And when he gave that eulogy, it was as though Howard had lived with us for 10 years. He knew everything there was to say, and he did it beautifully. And that's one thing that I learned about Howard, is that if you're gonna talk about somebody, find out what people have to say about them. And I'm gonna do that today because I think that my words do come from the heart. But there's so many people throughout the country that have had so many wonderful things to say about Howard. As I mentioned, he was such a stalwart with the American Association of Justice. And they put together this book that we have at our office, and they provided it, many copies to the family and to some of his dearest friends. And this book is basically a collection of the emails that were sent across the country when everyone found out that Howard had passed away. The book contains some of the best photographs that we could find of Howard. And this photograph here that just disappeared, right on time, epitomizes Howard. He loved his dogs. He loved going to Bald Head, and he always had that beautiful, infectious smile, and that's who Howard was, and that's how people remembered Howard. And as we walk out here today, that's the way Howard would want you to remember him. But let me just read a few passages from this book that I think were so germane as to who Howard Twiggs was. One lawyer wrote, "There was no equal to Howard on any scale of professionalism, kindness, generosity, honesty, humility, leadership, or decency. He is a hero to everyone he knew. In our adversarial business, it speaks volumes to say that you never heard an unkind word ever spoken about Howard or by Howard about anybody else. He was a consummate lawyer and gentleman. Howard left the world in a better place because of his life's work. I truly loved and admired Howard and stood in awe at his accomplishments, his selflessness, his leadership, his generosity. He was a one of a kind, and there is no replacement." Another lawyer wrote, "Howard was a friend, mentor, and hero to all of us. He inspired us by the consistency, sincerity, and depth of his conviction. Howard led by example. He was a lion of empathy." Another person wrote, "Howard was one of the world's sweetest people. Howard's joy of life infected everyone he met. He made us better because he believed we could be better." Howard was a great plaintiff's lawyer, a devoted opponent of the death penalty, a fierce fighter for the rights of criminal defendants, a deeply committed advocate for the civil rights of all people, a tenacious and forward-thinking legislator and champion for the underdog his entire life. Most importantly, Howard was maybe the finest, kindest, warmest, and most supportive man I have ever met. He never met a stranger, never turned down a request for assistance, never failed to fight a fight that needed to be fought, while he always maintained his gentlemanly and professional manner. His love and passion were contagious." And that was Howard. Now, I do remember that we traveled to San Francisco on a couple of times to visit Sissy, who's here with us today. He's one of Howard's daughters. And on one of those trips out there, Sissy was in business school. And she had invited a lot of her classmates who were from Europe. They were from Spain, they were from France, they were from all over Europe. And their view of the civil justice system was that the trial lawyers were the people who were the greedy lawyers. You know, they were thinking about the McDonald's case. They had read John Grisham's books about lawyers and all the bad things. And so Howard took it on himself for a period of about an hour and a half, probably, talking to these students at this dinner party to make them understand what the United States civil justice system was all about. And I'm sure he started out with the Magna Carta. When we were in this courtroom, and he gave his final closing argument, I think Rick Hunter was here, one of the first things he started talking to the jury about was the Magna Carta, and I'm going, oh my God. But it turned out okay. But that was Howard. If he saw that somebody didn't understand what needed to be understood, he took it upon himself to make sure they understood that. Now, we were there another time, and we had landed a case that we thought we were going to do very well in, and Howard's feeling good about himself, and so we went out to a restaurant, and we were looking at the menu, and there was an 1875 port on the menu, and Howard said, "Let's get that, Strickland." He said, "You know, that's $175. We can, you know, we're going to make some money. Why don't we go ahead and splurge one time and do that?" And I said, "Okay, fine." And so the waiter came over, and Howard ordered it, and found out that it was $175 an ounce. And without meeting a beat, Howard said, "That's very good. We'll take a half ounce each." And we laughed about that a lot. Every time we ordered a bottle of wine, we'd always had a little discussion as to whether we should order an ounce or go ahead and get a whole bottle. And usually we went for the bottle. You know, in closing, I'd just like to say that, again, that I'm honored to be asked to speak on behalf of Howard. Howard left the world a better place because of his life's work, and everyone he met along the way became a better person for having met Howard. I truly loved him. I admired him. I stood in awe of his accomplishments, his selflessness, his leadership, and his generosity. To say that I will miss him is a gross understatement. He was truly one of a kind, and I'm so proud to have been associated with him. Thank you very much.
Our last presenter this afternoon will be Ralph Bo McDonald. Bo is with the law firm of Bailey and Dixon. Got his AB from UNC at Chapel Hill in '61, and got his law degree also from UNC in '64.
Please go. I too am honored to be here this afternoon to speak in memory of my partner and friend Kenneth Wooten. I've attended these memorial services whenever I could through the years because of the memories they invoke, and I've had a lot invoked today. And looking back over the time Ken practiced law while preparing these remarks has brought back many memories of people and events for me. Ken began his practice more than 60 years ago when the practice of law was much simpler. For example, the people who practiced law then called themselves lawyers rather than attorneys. Discovery was limited. You researched the law by pulling books. You dictated documents to secretaries who took shorthand. Copies were made with carbon paper. And you charged mostly flat fees that did not exceed the county bar minimum schedule. Raleigh was a much different place then. Population was probably about 50,000 people. There were no mixed drinks, no condos, and nothing much of anything urban north of Glenwood Avenue. Also, segregation was still in full force. Ken was born in West Tennessee in 1925. He grew up in Jackson. He lost an eye in an auto accident at the age of 2. He was sitting in his mother's lap. They didn't have any infant seats in those days. He was also suffered from or struggled with arthritis most of his life. He went to Vanderbilt and graduated in 1945. While he was there, he had a blind date with Jane Herring, a medical intern from Raleigh, who's here today. And that blind date must have been a success because he followed her back to North Carolina, where she came to Raleigh and established her pediatric practice, and he entered Duke Law School. They were married in 1946. He graduated from Duke in 1947. He was 22 years old, having entered college at 17 and finished undergraduate in law in 5 years. In 1948, he went to work in the AG's office, where he served under 5 AGs. And he rose to Assistant Attorney General and head of the Highway Section. Ken was always very proud of the work his section did during his tenure handling the many condemnation cases that came before them. In 1950, Ken and Jane moved to their house on Williamson Drive, where they remained for, well, in excess of 50 years, until they moved to Whitaker Glen. They raised their children, Susan Gaines and Walter, both of whom are here with their mother. And they have a granddaughter, Kate Frost, who's living in Shanghai and can't be here. My first contact with Ken was there on Williamson Drive. I delivered the Raleigh Times. That's the defunct evening paper rather than the bar that's downtown now. We got along okay. He paid his bills, and he didn't complain if I occasionally missed the porch and threw the paper in the bushes as I rode by on my bike. 1960 was a big, important year for Ken. He managed Malcolm Sewell's gubernatorial campaign. Sewell had been the AG until March of that year when he resigned to run. And that was a very important watershed election for North Carolina. The Democratic primary pitted Sewell against Terry Sanford, John Larkins, and I. Beverly Lake. And as you'll recall, Sanford defeated Lake in the runoff primary. After the primary, Ken resigned from the AG's office and went into practice briefly with Sewell. Then he went into partnership with Ruffin Bailey and Wright Dixon, forming Bailey, Dixon, and Wooten, where he remained for the rest of his career. He ran the business side of the practice and provided order and financial discipline, which, based on my knowledge of the personalities, I'm sure was much needed. Now, Ken was a worrier, and he did have a tendency to remind people what they had to do and when they ought to do it. This caused some minor friction within the firm from time to time. I suspect his family had a similar experience. And I was amused to hear the pastor of Eden Street Methodist Church mention in his affectionate eulogy of Ken that after Ken stopped practicing law full-time, he visited the church offices frequently, roamed the halls, and freely offered advice as to how to run the church. Well, excuse me, while I'm on the topic, Eden Street was a big part of Ken's life. He married there. He served at various times as chair of the administrative board and lay leader, and he was a long-time choir member. With respect to his practice, while he was managing Bailey and Dixon's business, Ken carried on his own practice, of course. He was business, real estate, condemnations, and he especially enjoyed his relationships with the North Carolina Board of Pharmacy and the College Foundation. He also served for a time as the assistant judge of the Raleigh City Court. A number of people used to call him judge before court reform made all courts uniform. He maintained his interest in politics long after the 1960 campaign, and working with Ruffin Bailey, who was one of the 2 senators from Wake, he was able to keep abreast, and he especially loved to know what was going on. He loved hanging out with Ruffin's legislative colleagues and lobbyist cronies such as Hathaway Cross and Wilbert Forbes and Les Branson, who frequented our offices at the time. He also loved to stir up trouble in our office building, the Durham Life Insurance Building, now the Wake County Office Building, which was full of lawyers. He gossiped and shared his intrigues with the wonderful elevator operators there, one of whom once referred to him as that little Mr. Wooten, a name that stuck. And he rarely missed the daily assembly of lawyers at Honeker's Sandwich Shop in the insurance building, which was in the space where the Wake County Public Library is now, the branch anyway. Mid-mornings after calendar calls, criminal, civil, and title lawyers came over from the courthouse or down from their offices to swap stories and talk about those not present. Regulars in addition to Ken, all of whom have passed, included Tom Banks, Joe Cheshire IV, not the fifth, Jack Gully, Sid Lancaster, Clyde Douglas, Carl Churchill, Joe Moore, Jake Todd, Jimmy Walker, and Esther, the veteran red-headed waitress, who had a quicker wit than any of the lawyers. Ken thrived in this collegial environment, and his popularity and respect among his peers was confirmed by his election as president of the Wake County Bar Association in 1972. He retired from his full-time practice in 1987 when he was only 62, so that he and Jane could travel. He also became a dedicated volunteer with Meals on Wheels, and I believe chaired the organization. He died on December 3, 2009, at the age of 84 at Mayview Convalescent Center. I asked our partner, Wright Dixon, for his thoughts about Ken. And Wright said, "We never fully appreciated what Ken did for us in the firm and for the profession and community. He didn't seek credit and was content to do his part and stay out of the limelight." I agree, and would add that he was a good and loyal partner and a thoroughly decent person.
I want to, on behalf of the committee and the Bar and 10th Judicial District, want to thank the presenters for another excellent job. I've been to many of these over the years, and it is just always astounding to me, not only the people that are being talked about, but also the people who present the stories, and they very capably came through again today. Also, we wouldn't be able to do this without a very hard-working committee, and it's probably one of the most committed committees of the bar. And I'd like to call out the names of those who are on the committee, and if they're here, if they'll just please stand. My co-chair is Reed Fountain. The others on the committee are George Anderson, C.K. Brown, Emily Cato, Andrew Chiaffi, Thomas Douglas, Ed Gaskins, Judge Lucy Inman, Bill Joslin, John Mabe, Robert McMillan, Judge Michael R. Morgan, Brian Wooten, Earl Purser, Fred Toms, and Chris Wine. And there's one in particular I'll have to mention. I talked with Earl Purser yesterday, and he never misses these unless there's some reason. And he has emphysema, and it tends to act up at times. And unfortunately, with this cold weather, it acted up this week. And so I talked to him from his hospital room, but he wanted me to make sure, I told everybody, that he was here in spirit, even though he couldn't be here personally. But I thank the committee, and I thank Judge Morgan and the other court officials, and of course the staff that helps us with this, Alice Story, who is in her last days, weeks of serving as the executive director for the Bar Association. So, and I thank you for your patience in allowing for the technical to get set up. It will be treasured by the family, and I thank you very much for being here. I'll turn it back over to Judge Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. It's always a perilous exercise to attempt to recognize individuals, especially when there's such a large group here, but I endeavored to do so at the outset in an effort to let you know exactly who was here instead of recognizing just broad categories. So with that, as I was recognizing elected officials, I failed to see that one of our own members of the local bar, Mayor Harold Broadwell, is present, and I do want to recognize his presence, and again, please excuse me for neglecting to see you at the outset. On behalf of all of us gathered here today, I thank the Memorials Committee of the sponsoring bar associations for organizing a wonderful and meaningful program. May we all leave here forever touched by those whom we have paused to remember today, while being inspired by the strong legacies which they have left for all of us. Mr. Bailiff, at this time, if you'll put us in recess.
All rise. Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, Honorable Superior Court of County, now stands adjourned with special proceeding. Sunday night, God save the States on record.
Judge Thigpen? Man, thank you. Appreciate you letting me be a part of all this. My pleasure. How you doing?
Judge, it's great to be here.
Masterful job of capturing Carlton was a piece of work, as we know.
Cressie, I wanted to thank you for your presentation on behalf of Carlton.
Oh, sure.
You know, these are, in my mind, this is the best thing the mandatory bar does.
No, I agree.
You know, I mean, Carlton was a wonderful person, and I can understand, you know, how you benefited from that association.
Oh, yeah.
I ran into Dan and told him about the ceremony today, and he said that he was having to keep the lights on over at the old firm, and I said, well, that's because Cressie left to be a judge, and Carlton left to my dad, and then he had presented actually for one of your other partners, I think.
Stevens.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, you know.
Well, at least we got a chance to divide it all up.
Good to see you.
I'll see you.
Thank you. That's so kind. What's coming from you, that's high praise. And I appreciate seeing you. It's good to have you in the court. Thank you. Likewise.
Goodbye. Nice to see you, sir. Have a nice holiday.
Art, well done.
Thank you, sir.
Excellent.
Thank you, Judge.
Mr. Brewer, thank you. Excellent program. Thanks for letting me be a part.
Our pleasure.
Mr. Brewer, I thought everything was wonderful today.
Thank
They're
you very
always
much.
good, but there was something very nice about it.
Had a good tune, and it's really touching to see
I wish I could see pictures.
see a spouse get out of, well, being in that condition and come in and show his love for his wife.
And I remember having worked with both of them in the past. She was absolutely.
She must have been.
She absolutely.
It sounds like she can keep up with him real well.
Absolutely,
And that's
sir.
saying a lot.
Nice to see you. We'll see you next time.
Good to see you, Robbie.
Good to
Is this
see you,
your,
Jay.
is this your final?
No, I enjoyed it too much.
Good
I'd have to
stories.
pay y'all to make me so I could stay.
No.
I would never go.
You guys always do a good job of it.
Thank you. We appreciate that, Rick.
Thank you.
That's it. That's a terrible
Oh, no, that never hurts. That never hurts.
How are you, sir?
Very well.
Appreciate you
But I'll
being
tell you
here.
what.
See you at Eagles. Yes, sir. Nice to
Okay,
see
you have great holidays.
We need a little Lego section here.
Oh, come
Teasing you, then we should have all this shirt. Yeah, I was gonna say, I had the thick neck.
I emailed all my friends. And a couple of my friends said, well, I'm glad you reminded me, because I was trying to figure out who the fuck.